She married a duke and lost everything. $300 million gone. Stolen by the aristocrat she thought would give her a title and respect. Instead, he gave her 66 bankruptcy petitions, pawned jewels, and a wedding gift of fake pearls he never even paid for. This is the story of how an American heiress learned that British nobility came with a price tag she could never afford to pay. December 1931. A courtroom in London. Helena Zimmerman, Duchess of Manchester, 53 years old, stood before a judge seeking her freedom from a marriage that had consumed 31 years and most of her father's $10 million fortune, the equivalent of $300 million today. The woman who had been born into Cincinnati railroad wealth, who had married a duke, who had owned castles in 3 countries, now faced the grim accounting of what that marriage had cost. 66 bankruptcy petitions filed against her husband, illegal pawning of family jewels, prison sentences, public humiliation, and at the center of it all, a wedding gift that captured the entire charade. 3 strands of imitation pearls, purchased for $695, never paid for. Fake jewels for a fake marriage. This was not where the fairy tale was supposed to end. In 1878, when she was born into Eugene Zimmerman's Standard Oil millions, society believed she would marry brilliantly, live elegantly, and pass her wealth intact to her children. Instead, she married a compulsive gambler, a serial adulterer, and one of England's most notorious frauds. She watched her fortune dissolve through 30 years of bankruptcy courts, seized luggage, and unpaid bills. But more than that, she lived the great cautionary tale of Gilded Age America. What happens when old world titles meet new world money, when trusts fail to protect, when fathers die too soon, when women have wealth but no control. This is the story of how a woman born with everything lost most of it to a man who gave her fake pearls. Helena Zimmerman. Born September 25th, 1878, in Cincinnati, Ohio. Sole heir to Eugene Zimmerman's railroad and oil fortune. When she entered the world at the family's Auburn Avenue mansion, her father's wealth stood at approximately $2 million, climbing toward $10 million by his death. In modern currency, she would inherit the equivalent of $300 million. To understand the magnitude, enough money to buy every mansion on Fifth Avenue, more than the annual budget of most American cities. The annual income from that fortune alone would be $300,000 per year, or nearly $9 million in modern terms. She would grow up in Cincinnati's Mount Auburn neighborhood, attend French boarding schools, summer in Europe, and marry into one of England's oldest ducal families. She would have 4 children, lose 3 castles, watch her husband serve 9 months in Wormwood Scrubs prison, file for divorce after 3 decades of financial chaos, and die at age 93, having salvaged some dignity, if not the fortune. But the remarkable thing about Helena's story isn't just the money itself. It's what the money revealed. About the transatlantic marriage market that sold American daughters to broke European nobles. About the legal structures that gave husbands control of wives' wealth. About gambling. About creditors. About the difference between titles and character. About what fathers try to protect and what they cannot. About how 3 fake pearl necklaces can symbolize an entire sham. This documentary will take you inside the ballrooms of London society, the bankruptcy courts of England, the sale of Kylemore Castle, the pawning of the Manchester jewels, and the final divorce that freed Helena from a man who had been spending her father's money since 1900. We'll examine every dollar inherited, every castle purchased, every bankruptcy filed, every humiliation endured, every penny that survived. Because Helena's story is the dollar princess story. The The story of American wealth rescuing European aristocracy and European aristocracy destroying American fortunes. Let's begin where all great fortunes begin, with the man who made the money. Helena's fortune did not appear from thin air. It was built, amassed, and carefully accumulated over 50 years by a man who understood one thing: how to turn America's industrial expansion into personal wealth. Eugene Zimmerman, born December 17th, 1845, in Vicksburg, Mississippi, son of Solomon Zimmerman, a Dutch immigrant who owned a foundry and several slaves. Orphaned at 13 when his father died. Sent to Cincinnati in 1859 to attend farmers' college. His beginning was not privileged. The Civil War destroyed what little inheritance he might have claimed when Union forces burned the family's foundry. Young Eugene, just 16, enlisted in the Union Navy. He served with distinction throughout the war, participating in the bombardment of Vicksburg, his own birthplace. By war's end, he commanded the steamship Wachita and held the rank of lieutenant. 20 years old, penniless, but trained in leadership and decisive action. What Eugene had that many veterans did not: an understanding that America's next great wealth would come not from agriculture, but from industry, specifically from the two forces reshaping the nation: oil and railroads. The oil business came first. In the years immediately following the war, Eugene acquired holdings in Pennsylvania and Ohio oil fields. The details of how a penniless Navy veteran obtained these holdings are lost to history, but obtain them he did. By the early 1870s, he owned substantial acreage in what would become some of America's most productive oil regions. Then came the most important decision of his financial life. In 1873, John D. Rockefeller was consolidating the oil industry through Standard Oil, buying out competitors or driving them under. Eugene chose to sell. He traded his oil holdings for Standard Oil stock, becoming a substantial shareholder and gaining a seat on the company's board. The Standard Oil shares would prove to be one of the greatest investments in American history, as Rockefeller's monopoly tightened its grip on 90% of American oil refining. The value of those shares multiplied. Eugene's initial stake grew year by year. 1875, worth approximately $300,000. 1880, worth approximately $600,000. 1890, worth approximately $1.5 million. 1900, when Helena married, worth approximately $4 million. 1914, at his death, worth approximately $6 million, with another $4 million in railroad holdings. The annual dividend income from Standard Oil alone gave Eugene between $70,000 and $100,000 per year, more than most Americans would earn in a lifetime, paid as passive income every 12 months. But Eugene was not a passive investor. He took his Standard Oil dividends and built a railroad empire. In 1875, he purchased 13,000 acres of timberland in what is now Yosemite, Casey County, Kentucky. He built lumber mills, employed 300 men, and constructed a wooden train track from Kings Mountain to Staffordsville. This was the foundation. In 1884, he organized the Green River Railway Company. In 1882, he became president of the Chesapeake and Nashville Railway. In 1888, he was elected president of the Dayton, Fort Wayne, and Chicago Railway. In 1904, he became president of the Cincinnati, Hamilton, and Dayton Railway. Over 25 years, Eugene assembled a railroad empire stretching from the Midwest to the South, connecting coal fields to cities, moving freight and passengers, earning revenue from every mile of track and every ton of cargo. His method was consistent: identify undervalued lines, buy control, improve operations, connect to larger systems, sell at profit or hold for dividends. He was ruthless in business, but scrupulous about contracts. Newspapers called him sharp but honest. Workers found him demanding but fair with wages. Society found him nouveau riche but respectable. Unlike some robber barons, Eugene did not build his fortune through obvious corruption. He bribed no one publicly. He destroyed no competitors through illegal means. He simply understood the industrial economy better than most men and moved faster. By 1900, Eugene Zimmerman was one of Cincinnati's wealthiest men. His primary residence stood at 2448 Auburn Avenue, the southeast corner of Auburn and McMillan in Mount Auburn, Cincinnati's most affluent neighborhood. The mansion was substantial. 3 stories, 15 rooms, staff quarters for 8 servants, stables for 4 horses, and grounds occupying nearly half an acre in the heart of the city. Annual household expense, approximately $15,000. Staff, butler, housekeeper, cook, 2 maids, coachman, groom, gardener. He maintained memberships in Cincinnati's most exclusive institutions, the Queen City Club, the Loyal Legion, the American Yacht Club, the Lottos Club. His social position was secure, his business reputation established, his political connections strong. He dined with senators, consulted with governors, and met regularly with other industrial magnates. He had one vulnerability, his only child, his daughter, born to his wife, Marietta Evans Zimmerman. September 25, 1878. The Auburn Avenue Mansion. Marietta Zimmerman, age 32, delivered a daughter at approximately 2 in the afternoon. Dr. John Worthington attended. The baby weighed 7 pounds, arrived healthy, and was named Helena. The nursery had been prepared months in advance. 2nd floor, south-facing windows, wallpapered in pale yellow with hand-painted flowers. The crib was mahogany, imported from France, cost $300. The layette, all the infants' clothing and linens, came to $200, an amount equal to a working man's annual wages. Gifts arrived by the dozens: silver rattles, embroidered blankets, savings bonds, stock certificates. Total value of gifts received in the first month, estimated at $5,000. From birth, Helena Zimmerman was wealthy. Her mother's time with her would be brief and precious. Marietta died of peritonitis in April 1882, when Helena was only 4 years old. The little girl would retain no clear memories of her mother. What remained were photographs, stories told by her father, and the fact of being raised by governesses and tutors rather than by maternal affection. Eugene never remarried. He poured his paternal devotion into his daughter and his business into building her future security. By age 5, Helena's daily routine was established. Morning, awakened at 7 by her German governess, Fräulein Schmidt, who earned $800 annually. Dressed in imported fabrics, typical morning dress cost $30. Breakfast in the nursery: oatmeal, fruit, milk, toast. Morning lessons from 9 to noon. German conversation, basic arithmetic, reading, piano practice, drawing. Afternoon, luncheon, followed by outdoor exercise if weather permitted. Dancing lessons twice weekly from Madame Aubert, $3 per lesson. Carriage rides through the city with her governess. Tea at 4. Evening, dinner at 6. She usually alone in the nursery, though sometimes permitted to dine with her father if no business guests were present. Evening bath. Stories read by the governess. Bed by 8. Sunday routine differed. Church services at St. Paul's Episcopal, where the Zimmerman family maintained a pew that cost $200 annually. Afterward, visiting or receiving visitors, all carefully choreographed social training for future society obligations. The child's world was circumscribed by wealth and expectation. She understood from earliest consciousness that she was different from other children. that her father was important, that their house was grander than others. By age 8, she could converse in German and French. By age 10, she could play Chopin adequately on the piano. By age 12, she understood that she was being prepared for something, though the exact nature remained vague. In 1890, when Helena turned 12, Eugene made a crucial decision. She would be educated in France. American finishing schools were adequate for American society, but Eugene had larger ambitions. He wanted his daughter to move comfortably in international circles, to speak perfect French, to understand European culture. In September 1890, Helena was enrolled at the Convent of the Sacred Heart in Auteuil, just outside Paris. Cost: $1,200 annually, plus travel, wardrobe, and incidentals, bringing the total to approximately $3,000 per year. She would remain in France for the next 8 years, returning to Cincinnati only for summer holidays. The convent education was rigorous: French language and literature, Latin, mathematics, geography, history, religious instruction, music, drawing, needlework, deportment. The explicit curriculum prepared students to be cultivated wives and mothers. The implicit curriculum prepared them to marry well, meaning to marry wealth or title, preferably both. Helena excelled. She was naturally graceful, unusually pretty, disciplined in her studies. Teachers described her as accomplished in all the arts suitable to young ladies of good family. By age 18, she spoke French and German fluently, could read Latin, played piano and harp, sketched competently, and understood the intricate rules governing European high society. She had also absorbed the expectation that would shape her fate, that marriage was destiny, that the right marriage was everything, and that American heiresses existed to rescue aristocratic European families from financial ruin while elevating their own families into ancient nobility. June 1900. Helena returned from France for the summer. She was now 21 years old. In photographs from this period, she appears striking. Blonde hair arranged in the Gibson girl style, blue eyes, fair complexion, slender but not thin. The Cincinnati Enquirer described her as a handsome blonde and a belle. She stood to inherit Eugene's entire fortune. Conservative estimate: $10 million, probably more when all holdings were finally valued. Annual income available to her: $300,000. In the transatlantic marriage market, she was premium goods. European aristocrats, their estates mortgaged and their ancient family wealth exhausted by agricultural depression and industrial change, were actively hunting American heiresses. The newspapers cheerfully called them dollar princesses, American money buying European titles. Eugene Zimmerman knew this. He had not spent 20 years building a fortune only to see it extracted by some penniless foreign noble with nothing to offer but a title and debts. He was vigilant. Too vigilant, as it turned out. Because in August 1900, while vacationing at the Hotel Mathewson in Cincinnati, Helena met her doom in person, though she thought she was meeting her destiny. The meeting actually occurred across the Atlantic, not in Cincinnati, but at a costume ball at the Brittany Coast resort of Dinard, France, in late summer 1900. Helena was there with her father and a chaperone. Also present, William Angus Drogo Montague, Marquess of Mandeville, heir to the Duke of Manchester, age 23. In November, when he succeeded to his father's title 2 months after meeting Helena, he would become the 9th Duke of Manchester, with 3 castles, 27,000 acres, and debts exceeding £600,000. The Duke needed money desperately. His father, the 8th Duke, had declared bankruptcy the very year he inherited the title, despite having married his own American heiress, Consuelo Iznaga of New York. The Manchester Dukes had been broke for 2 generations and getting broker. Young William, called Kim by his family and friends, had spent his late teens and early 20s aggressively hunting wealthy women. In 1897, attempting to fox his creditors, he unilaterally announced his engagement to May Goulet, one of America's richest heiresses. Miss Goulet was surprised and horrified, having never agreed to any such thing. The false announcement made newspapers on both continents and established young Manchester's reputation as a shameless fortune hunter. He had drifted through Oxford without distinction, tried acting, tried journalism, tried anything that might pay bills or distract creditors. Nothing worked. Marriage to money was his only solution. When he encountered Helena Zimmerman at the Dinard Ball, he saw salvation. She saw romance. He was handsome in the thin-faced, aristocratic British mode. He possessed easy charm, excellent manners, amusing conversation, and an ancient title. He told stories of Kimbolton Castle, the family's principal seat in Huntingdonshire, with its 100 rooms and 800 years of history. He described London society, royal connections, the glamour of being a duchess. He was, in short, everything that 8 years of European finishing school had taught Helena to value. He proposed within weeks. Eugene Zimmerman was furious. He investigated. What he discovered horrified him. William Montague was 23 years old and already facing bankruptcy. His father had died, leaving an estate encumbered by £600,000 in debts. The family's 3 castles, Kimbolton in England, Tandragee in Northern Ireland, Kylemore in Ireland, were all mortgaged. Annual estate income was approximately £15,000. Annual debt service was £20,000. The mathematics were impossible. Moreover, William's personal reputation was terrible. He gambled recklessly. He consorted with actresses of dubious reputation. He had no occupation, no income, no prospects except marrying money. Eugene flatly forbid the marriage. He ordered Helena home to Cincinnati immediately. She obeyed, but the separation only intensified her romantic conviction. Letters flew across the Atlantic. The Duke declared undying love. Helena declared the same. Eugene held firm. No marriage, no consent, no money. For 2 months, stalemate. Then in November 1900, Helena made the decision that would determine her fate. She returned to England, ostensibly to visit friends, accompanied by a chaperone. The chaperone proved useless. On November 14, 1900, at Marylebone Church in London, Helena Zimmerman married William Angus Drogo Montague, 9th Duke of Manchester, in a private ceremony. Present: the bride, the groom, 2 witnesses. Absent: her father, his mother, any family from either side. The Duke's mother, Consuelo, the Dowager Duchess, didn't believe the first reports and refused to acknowledge the marriage until shown the church register. Eugene Zimmerman learned of his daughter's marriage from a cablegram and the morning newspapers. The New York Times headline read, "Manchester is married, wedded to Helena Zimmerman of Cincinnati. Her papa has money." He was bitterly opposed to the match. Neither of the principals obtained the consent of their parents, and the Dowager Duchess is unreconciled. The Los Angeles Herald added, "It is considered probable that the young couple will be severely punished for their hasty act, both by the Duchess's mother and by Mr. Zimmerman, neither of whom will be likely to overlook the insult." But Eugene Zimmerman was a practical man. The marriage was done. Divorce was scandalous and would shame Helena more than the Duke. The only option was to make the best of disaster through careful financial planning. Within weeks, Eugene's lawyers had drafted trust documents designed to protect Helena's inheritance from her new husband. The trust terms were explicit. Principal amount, $5 million from Helena's inheritance to be held in trust. Trustees. 3 men selected by Eugene, including attorney John E. Bruce of Cincinnati. Income distribution. Helena would receive the annual income from the trust, estimated at $75,000 per year, later rising to $150,000. The Duke would receive nothing directly, so principal access. Helena could not access principal without trustee approval. The Duke could never access principal under any circumstances. Upon Helena's death, trust principal would pass to her children, not to her husband. Additional provision. Eugene would provide a separate allowance of $30,000 annually while he lived, again paid to Helena, not to the Duke. This structure should have protected the fortune. It did not. Because trusts only work if 3 conditions hold. The trust must be properly drafted, trustees must be vigilant, and the beneficiary must not systematically undermine the trust by giving money to the person the trust was designed to exclude. Helena would fail the 3rd condition spectacularly, but that failure lay in the future. In late November 1900, as the newly married Duchess of Manchester, Helena believed she had won everything: love, title, position, and security. What she actually had was love, probably genuine on her part, certainly performed on his, and a husband whose criminal record would eventually include 66 bankruptcy petitions and a 9-month prison sentence. The fake pearls came almost immediately. In December 1900, 1 month after the wedding, the Duke purchased 3 imitation pearl necklaces from Frederick and Company, Broadway, New York. Purchase price: $695. Payment: none. The vendor sued in 1903. Newspapers covered the case with delight. The New York Times announced, "Seizure of Duke's luggage, 125 pieces held for unpaid jeweler's bill of $695. The Duke and Duchess had been returning from America aboard the Lusitania when customs officials seized their entire luggage at debarkation, 125 pieces held hostage until the bill was paid. The Duchess, humiliated, paid the bill herself. The fake pearls were a symbol, a perfect metaphor for the marriage itself, outwardly respectable, inwardly false, and never paid for by the man who gave them. Helena wore those pearls in London society. Photographs from 1912 show her in full court dress, wearing either real pearls or the imitation ones. No one could tell, which was rather the point. Real or fake, her husband had never paid for them. Real or fake. They represented exactly what he was: beautiful surface, empty beneath, and always someone else's expense. The early years of the marriage established patterns that would persist for 3 decades. The Duke's gambling was compulsive. He would bet on horses, cards, dice, anything. When he won, he spent the winnings immediately. When he lost, which was usually, he either borrowed money or simply didn't pay his debts. Creditors learned to sue. Helena's response to her husband's gambling was to pay the debts. Initially, this seemed like the proper wifely duty. Gradually, it became an overwhelming financial drain that trust income could not cover. She began requesting advances on principal from the trustees. They reluctantly approved, believing they were protecting the Duchess's social position. They were actually financing the Duke's gambling. His infidelity was even more blatant. Within 2 years of marriage, the Duke's affairs were public knowledge. London society knew he kept multiple mistresses. The most infamous incident occurred at Kimbolton Castle, the family's principal seat, when the Duke was discovered in bed with 4 women simultaneously, including the notorious bisexual actress Tallulah Bankhead. Helena's response was stoic public silence and private devastation. She produced 4 children rapidly, perhaps hoping that motherhood and heirs would stabilize the marriage. Their children. Lady Mary Alice Montague, born 1901. She would marry late and never produce heirs of her own. Alexander George Francis Drogo Montague, born 1902, who would become the 10th Duke of Manchester and continue the family's tradition of financial chaos. Lord Edward Eugene Fernando Montague, born 1906, who would marry 5 times and die broke. Lady Ellen Millicent Louise Montague, born 1908, who would marry twice and divorce twice. 4 children born in 7 years, all growing up amid their father's gambling, infidelity, and incessant financial crises, all inheriting some measure of the family instability. Helena loved her children, by all accounts, but children did not save the marriage. Nothing could save what had never been genuine. The properties became both Helena's pride and her financial ruin. The Manchester family estates should have been magnificent. In practice, they were monuments to decay and debt. Kimbolton Castle, Huntingdonshire, the principal ducal seat. Built in the 13th century, rebuilt in the 17th. This was where Helena became a duchess. The castle contained more than 100 rooms, spread across multiple wings, and occupied nearly 15 acres of grounds. Staff required. Minimum 30 servants, including butler, housekeeper, chef, footman, maids, gardeners, grooms. Annual operating cost, approximately £20,000. Annual revenue from the estate, approximately £10,000. Annual deficit, £10,000. Who paid the deficit? Helena. Her trust income was diverted year after year to maintain Kimbolton, to pay the staff, to keep up appearances. The Duke contributed nothing because the Duke had nothing. The estate technically belonged to him, but every penny of operating expense came from Helena's American fortune. Tandragee Castle, County Armagh, Northern Ireland. The Manchester family's Irish seat. Smaller than Kimbolton, but still substantial. 40 rooms, 500 acres, requiring a staff of 15. Annual operating cost, approximately £8,000. Annual deficit, approximately £6,000. Again, paid by Helena. The Duke occasionally resided there, more often used it to impress friends or seduce actresses. Helena visited infrequently, finding the isolation oppressive and the expense appalling. Kylemore Castle, Connemara, County Galway, Ireland. This property had a particular poignancy. Eugene Zimmerman purchased Kylemore in 1903 as a wedding gift to his daughter, hoping that giving the couple their own estate might stabilise the marriage. He paid £60,000, approximately $300,000, equivalent to $9 million today. Kylemore was breathtaking. A massive Victorian castle built in the 1860s, situated on the shore of Kylemore Lough, surrounded by mountains. 33 bedrooms, 4 reception rooms, ballroom, billiard room, library. Grounds encompassing 13,000 acres. Staff requirement, 40 servants minimum. Annual operating cost, £25,000. The Duke and Duchess attempted to live there from 1903 to 1914. They could not afford it. Not even Helena's trust income combined with her father's allowance could sustain Kylemore's expenses. By 1914, the castle was already failing. Gardens untended, roofs leaking, staff wages in arrears. Eugene Zimmerman's death in December 1914 was the final blow. Eugene died on December 20th, 1914, at the Queen City Club in Cincinnati. He was 69 years old. The cause of death, heart failure, though newspapers noted he had been laughing over a $100,000 breach of promise lawsuit filed by I.C. Wareham, a Long Island dog fancier who claimed Eugene had promised to marry her. The lawsuit was absurd, but Eugene found it amusing. He laughed, he collapsed, he died within minutes. His will had been carefully prepared. Total estate value, $10 million, approximately $300 million in modern terms. Of this, $6 million was in Standard Oil stock and railroad securities. $4 million was in real estate, business interests, and other assets. Helena was the sole beneficiary, but she did not receive direct control. The will maintained the trust structure Eugene had established in 1900, with even stricter terms. All assets passed into the existing trust. Trustees retained full control. Helena would receive trust income, now increased to approximately $150,000 annually. The Duke received nothing. Not $1, not one property, not one stock certificate. The will explicitly excluded him. The trustees were given absolute discretion to approve or deny Helena's requests for principal access. They were specifically instructed to protect the trust from dissipation by any person other than the beneficiary. Eugene's intent was clear. He had watched his son-in-law squander money for 14 years. He had paid for Kylemore and watched the Duke gamble away its operating expenses. He had died knowing that Helena's marriage was a financial disaster. His will was his final attempt to protect his daughter from her own husband. It failed. Within 6 years, a Kylemore was sold. By 1920, the Duke's gambling debts had become unsustainable. Kylemore's operating expenses exceeded $60,000 annually. Helena could not cover this from trust income. The trustees refused to advance more principal for castle maintenance. The only option was sale. Buyer: Benedictine nuns from Ypres, Belgium, displaced by World War I. Purchase price: £40,000, approximately one-third what Eugene had paid 17 years earlier. The castle became a monastery. The grounds became a place of prayer and silence. Helena's grand Irish estate was gone, sold at massive loss, the proceeds used to pay her husband's debts. What Eugene had bought for $300,000, the Duke had forced them to sell for $100,000. Loss: $200,000, equivalent to $6 million modern dollars. Tandragee Castle followed. By 1922, the trustees forced its sale to cover more debts. Kimbolton Castle remained technically Manchester property, but Helena was forbidden by trustees from advancing more funds for its maintenance. The Duke lived there sporadically when not dodging creditors. Helena increasingly stayed in London rental properties, too ashamed to explain why the Duchess of Manchester could not reside in her husband's ducal seat. The bankruptcy filings became Helena's public shame. English bankruptcy law required petitions to be filed in public court with full disclosure of debts and assets. By 1918, 66 separate bankruptcy petitions had been filed against the Duke of Manchester. 66 times, creditors had sued the Duke for unpaid bills. 66 times. Helena had watched her husband's financial chaos documented in newspapers. The debts ranged from trivial to massive. Unpaid hotel bills, unpaid tailor bills, unpaid jeweler bills, unpaid wine merchant bills, gambling debts to private clubs, loans from moneylenders, mortgages on properties he didn't own. Most were settled by Helena paying them. Some were settled by the Duke declaring bankruptcy, which protected him legally but destroyed any remaining family reputation. The trustees tried to refuse payment. Helena begged them to pay. She could not endure the social humiliation of her husband being publicly declared bankrupt repeatedly. The trustees eventually compromised. They paid the debts, but recorded them as loans against Helena's future income. Each time they paid one of the Duke's debts, they reduced Helena's annual trust distribution. By 1925, Helena's annual trust income had been reduced from $150,000 to approximately $80,000 because so much had been diverted to paying her husband's debts. She was, in effect, impoverishing herself to maintain his public reputation. The jewels scandal revealed the Duke's character most starkly. The Manchester family jewels were held in trust, legally belonging to the duchy, but not to the Duke personally. This distinction was crucial. The Duke could not sell or pawn the jewels because he didn't own them. They belonged to the title, to be passed to future dukes. In 1925, several of the Manchester jewels appeared at a London pawnbroker. Investigation revealed the Duke had illegally pawned family jewels, making false statements to obtain cash. The amount obtained, £5,000. The legal consequence, prosecution for fraud. The sentence, 9 months in Wormwood Scrubbs prison. The scandal, absolute. The 9th Duke of Manchester, peer of the realm, Privy Councillor, served 9 months in one of London's grimmest prisons for stealing and pawning his own family's jewels to pay gambling debts. Helena was devastated, but not surprised. This was who she had married, a man who would steal from his own children's inheritance, pawn irreplaceable historical jewelry, lie to obtain cash, and serve prison time rather than live within means. Wormwood Scrubbs was built in the 1870s, a Victorian prison known for harsh conditions. The Duke served his 9 months in a cell, wore prison uniform, ate prison food, and endured the ultimate humiliation for a duke, being treated like a common criminal. Because he was a common criminal. Helena visited him in prison, not from love, but from duty, and perhaps from some faint hope that prison might reform him. It did not. Upon release, he immediately resumed gambling. Separation came gradually. After 1914, Helena and the Duke increasingly lived apart. She maintained a London residence. He drifted between Kimbleton, London hotels, and anywhere creditors couldn't find him. Rumours of separation appeared in newspapers as early as 1908. Formal separation proceedings began in 1915, were withdrawn, resumed in 1921, were withdrawn again, resumed in 1925. Each time, Helena withdrew proceedings. Why? Social convention, religious objection to divorce, hope that he might reform. She concerned for her children's inheritance of the title. By 1931, she finally understood. There would be no reform, no improvement, no redemption. In November 1931, the Duke absconded to Cuba. From Havana, he filed for divorce on grounds of abandonment. The absurdity was magnificent. He abandoned Helena, then he divorced her for abandonment. Cuban courts, notoriously flexible about such matters when paid appropriately, granted the divorce. In December 1931, Helena's marriage officially ended. 31 years, 4 children, 3 castles lost, millions spent, reputation damaged. And all she had to show for it was freedom, finally, and a title she would keep using because it was, at least, something she had paid for. The Duke remarried almost immediately. His new wife, Kathleen Dawes of Connecticut, a former actress, another American. Helena's response to learning her ex-husband had remarried within weeks. I wish her better luck than I had. The Duke's second marriage was no more successful than his first. He continued gambling, continued accumulating debts, continued his dissolute life. He died in February 1947 at Seaford, Sussex, age 70, having spent 66 years accomplishing nothing except the dissipation of 2 American fortunes and the degradation of an ancient title. Helena did not attend his funeral. After divorce, Helena's life took a remarkable turn. In 1937, she married Arthur Keith Falconer, 10th Earl of Kintore. This marriage was entirely different. The Earl was 64, she was 59. Both had been married before. Both understood what marriage at that age meant. Companionship, not passion. The Earl had his own fortune, diminished by agricultural depression, but still substantial. He required nothing from Helena financially. They divided their time between Keith Hall in Aberdeenshire, Scotland, and a London residence. They entertained modestly, lived quietly, and apparently found genuine contentment. The Earl died in 1966 at age 93. Helena lived another 5 years, dying December 15th, 1971, at age 93. Final residence: Keith Hall, Aberdeenshire. Cause of death: old age and pneumonia. Estate value at death: approximately £500,000, equivalent to 8 million modern dollars. She had salvaged something. Not the full 10 million her father left her, not even half of it, but enough to live comfortably, to leave inheritances to her children, and to die with dignity, intact, if not fortune. Her children's fates reflected the chaos of their upbringing. Alexander became the 10th Duke of Manchester and proved nearly as irresponsible as his father. He sold Kimbolton Castle, moved to Kenya, and lived on capital until it was gone. Edward married 5 times, each marriage briefer than the last, each ending in financial disaster. Mary and Ellen married reasonably well and lived respectable, if not distinguished, lives. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren scattered across England, America, and Australia, some maintaining aristocratic pretensions, most settling into middle-class obscurity. The great Zimmerman fortune that Eugene had spent 50 years building was, by the 3rd generation, essentially gone. Some remnants remained in trust for various descendants, but the massive concentration of wealth that Eugene had achieved was dissipated, scattered, lost to gambling, bad management, and the fundamental problem that wealth without wisdom cannot persist. Let us calculate exactly what Helena's marriage cost. Eugene Zimmerman's estate in 1914, $10 million. Helena's inheritance, held in trust, $10 million. By 1920, Kylemore sold at $200,000 loss, Tandragee sold at $100,000 loss, principal advances to cover Duke's debts, approximately $1 million. Annual deficits on castle maintenance, 1900 to 1920. Approximately $2 million. Legal fees for bankruptcy proceedings, separation proceedings, divorce, approximately $200,000. Total lost by 1931, approximately $3.5 million. Remaining at divorce, approximately $6.5 million. By 1971, at Helena's death, approximately $2 million equivalent remaining in the trust for descendants. She had lost approximately $8 million of the original $10 million fortune. That represents an 80% loss. $8 million, equivalent to 240 million modern dollars, lost over 70 years. The average loss was approximately $100,000 per year, or nearly 3 million modern dollars annually. That's $8,000 per day, every day, for 30 years, lost to her husband's gambling, his debts, his castle maintenance expenses, and the general chaos of the marriage. Could she have prevented this loss? Partially. If she had divorced earlier, if she had refused to pay his debts, if she had let him declare bankruptcy without interference. But Gilded Age social convention did not permit such choices easily. A duchess could not let her duke be publicly bankrupt without destroying her own position. A woman could not easily divorce in 1900 or 1910 or even 1920 without scandal. The trust structure Eugene created should have protected her. It failed because Helena systematically undermined it by begging trustees to advance principal to pay the Duke's debts. She spent 30 years protecting a man who deserved no protection. The trustees, for their part, should have been more forceful in refusing. But they were old men, uncomfortable refusing a distraught duchess. They advanced principle when they should have let her suffer the social consequences of her husband's conduct. The real structural problem was this. Gilded Age law gave the Duke no direct control of Helena's money, but it gave him complete control of family reputation, social position, and Helena's emotional attachments. He could not steal the money directly, but he could create situations where Helena chose to give him the money to avoid social catastrophe. He weaponized shame. He made her choose between money and reputation. She chose reputation every time, until finally there was almost no money left and no reputation left either. The fake pearls stand as perfect symbol. 3 strands of imitation pearls, purchased for $695, never paid for, given to Helena as a wedding gift, worn in London society, indistinguishable from real pearls at a distance, worthless up close. And this was the Duke of Manchester, impressive from afar, false when examined, never genuine, always someone else's expense. This was the marriage. Beautiful surface, hollow center, maintained only by Helena's money. This was the Gilded Age transatlantic marriage market. American wealth buying European titles, discovering too late that titles without character were worthless. Helena kept those pearls. Photographs from the 1920s show her still wearing them. By then she knew they were fake. By then she knew her marriage had been fake. By then she knew that everything the Duke had given her was false, except the title, which at least was legally real, even if the man who bore it was not. She wore them anyway, perhaps as reminder, perhaps as penance, perhaps simply because after spending millions on a fraudulent marriage, she could not bear to discard even fake pearls. The mansions, Helena knew, are mostly gone now. The Auburn Avenue house in Cincinnati, where she was born, was demolished in the 1950s. The site is now occupied by university buildings. Nothing marks where the Zimmerman mansion stood, where Eugene built his fortune's headquarters, where Helena lived as a girl. Kimbolton Castle still stands, magnificently. It is now a school, Kimbolton School, educating children in the castle, where the Duke of Manchester once gambled away an American heiress's fortune. The castle is open occasionally for tours. Visitors can walk through rooms where Helena lived, where she hosted society, where she endured her husband's infidelities. The Manchester family connection is noted in tour materials, but treated as historical curiosity rather than warning. Kylemore Castle remains one of Ireland's most photographed buildings. The Benedictine monastery thrives. Tourists visit by the thousands. They admire the Victorian Gothic architecture, the stunning loft setting, the mountains beyond. Few know that it was purchased by an American railroad magnate for his daughter, that she lost it to her husband's gambling debts, that it represents one of the Gilded Age's greatest financial disasters. Tandragee Castle still stands in Northern Ireland, privately owned. It is not open to the public. The connection to the Manchester family is remembered locally, but not widely known. Helena's grave is in the Keith Falconer family plot at Keithhall Churchyard, Aberdeenshire, Scotland. The gravestone reads, Helena Keith Falconer, Countess of Kintore, 1878 to 1971, beloved wife. No mention of her first marriage, no mention of being a duchess, no mention of American wealth or English aristocracy or any of the drama that consumed 50 years of her life. Just her second husband's name and beloved wife, which she apparently was to him, though she had not been beloved by the first husband, nor he by her. The grave is tended, occasionally visited by descendants, but not a tourist site. Most people who pass it have no idea that beneath the stone lies a woman who inherited $10 million and lost most of it to fake pearls and real gambling debts. How does this happen? How does a woman born with $10 million lose 80% of it in one lifetime? The structural problems were insurmountable. The trust that was supposed to protect her wealth was poorly enforced. Trustees had legal authority to refuse Helena's requests for principal advances. They rarely exercised that authority because Helena's requests came wrapped in desperation and social pressure. The Duke could not access the money directly, but he could manipulate Helena into accessing it for him. The gender problem was absolute. In 1900, married women's property rights were minimal. Even with a protective trust, Helena's legal position was weak. She could not easily divorce without losing social position. She could not refuse to support her husband without public scandal. She could not exercise independent financial control because society did not permit it. The personal problem was tragic. Helena genuinely believed, initially, that she loved the Duke and that he loved her. By the time she understood that he had married her for money, 4 children existed, and divorce meant destroying their inheritance of the title. By the time the children were grown, she was 50 years old, and divorce was finally imaginable. But 30 years of damage was done. The historical pattern was typical. Helena was one of dozens of dollar princesses, American heiresses, who married European aristocrats between 1870 and 1914. Most lost substantial portions of their fortunes. Consuelo Vanderbilt, who married the Duke of Marlborough, lost millions before divorcing. Mary Leiter, who married Lord Curzon, spent her fortune maintaining his political career and died relatively young. Anna Gould, who married the Comte de Castellane, lost vast sums before divorcing him and marrying again. The pattern repeated endlessly: American wealth, European titles, initial excitement, a gradual realization that titles without character or money were worthless, eventual financial catastrophe or divorce or both. The Gilded Age created massive American fortunes. It also created mechanisms for dissipating them: inadequate trust structures, gender laws that disempowered women, social conventions that prioritized reputation over financial prudence, a marriage market that commodified women and incentivized European aristocrats to hunt American heiresses. Helena Zimmerman's story is not unusual. It is typical. She was not uniquely foolish or unlucky. She was an ordinary victim of an exploitative system. The tragedy is not that she lost 80% of her fortune. The tragedy is that the system made this loss predictable, inevitable, and common. Could Helena have done things differently? If she had divorced in 1910, she would have saved perhaps $4 million. But divorce in 1910 meant social ostracism, her children losing their aristocratic connections, and personal shame that her generation found unbearable. If she had refused to pay the Duke's debts, he would have been publicly bankrupt repeatedly, and she would have been socially humiliated as the Duchess, whose Duke was a confessed bankrupt. If she had remained in America and refused to marry the Duke, she would have kept her fortune, but lived as a spinster, which her generation considered tragic failure. Every choice available to her was bad. She chose the path that seemed most socially acceptable and paid for it with most of her money. Given the constraints of her time, her gender, and her social class, it is hard to imagine what different choices she could have made that would have preserved both fortune and dignity. Perhaps there were no such choices. Perhaps the system was designed to extract American fortunes and transfer them to European aristocracy, and Helena was simply one of its victims. The fake pearls remind us that deception has many forms. The Duke deceived Helena about his character. Society deceived her about what marriage to a duke would mean. She perhaps deceived herself about the possibility of love and partnership in a transatlantic commercial marriage. The pearls symbolize all these deceptions: beautiful on the surface, false underneath, purchased on credit that would never be repaid. Helena wore those pearls for years, knowing they were fake, wearing them anyway. By the end, she must have understood they were the most honest thing her husband ever gave her, because at least the fake pearls never pretended to be anything except what they were. Her husband pretended for 30 years. Today, in 2026, Helena Zimmerman's story teaches lessons about wealth, marriage, trust, and protection. Legal structures must be more than technically correct. They must be vigorously enforced. Trustees must be willing to say no, even when the beneficiary begs. Wealthy women must have financial education and legal power, not just money held in trust. Marriage should not be a mechanism for transferring wealth from American families to foreign fortune hunters. Social conventions that prevent women from protecting themselves financially must be dismantled. These lessons seem obvious now. They were not obvious in 1900. They cost Helena Zimmerman $8 million to learn. The woman who was born with everything and died with something had spent her life learning that wealth without control is not wealth at all. It is just an account from which others withdraw. Eugene Zimmerman spent 50 years building a fortune. The Duke of Manchester spent 30 years destroying it. Helena spent 93 years living with the consequences. The fake pearls, never paid for, are the perfect metaphor. Beautiful, false, and ultimately emblematic of a marriage and an era that promised everything and delivered heartbreak. Helena Zimmerman, Duchess of Manchester, later Countess of Kintore. Born September 25, 1878. Died December 15, 1971. 93 years old. She inherited $10 million. She lost $8 million. She survived anyway. The pearls were fake, but her endurance was real.